Day 34. Saint-Anne-des-Monts to Parc National Forillon. I woke up very early, finding a little note on my front window. Someone from the church left a message, wishing me a safe travel and requesting a donation. Naturally, I knew that when I returned to Victoria, I would donate online as there was no possibility of donating to the church as it was closed. The COVID-19 pandemic had prevented large gatherings of people, although I didn't imagine there would be a lot of people in Saint-Anne-des-Monts in the first place. Finding out that there was a Tim Hortons down the street that was already opened, I stopped by and picked up a takeaway breakfast and headed out. Today my plan was to visit Parc National Forillon. I drove through Route 132 around the Gaspé Peninsula, and it was a beautiful, scenic drive. I've driven across a little over half of the country, from the mountainous areas of British Columbia and Alberta, through the flat plains of Saskatchewan and Manitoba, and all through the urban centers of Ontario and Quebec. Driving alongside the ocean was something I haven't done before, at least not around Atlantic Canada. I stopped numerous times to take pictures of the beautiful surroundings. While living on the West Coast and having lived in Vancouver previously, I was used to the rat race and rushing around to get from one point to the next. Here I felt relaxed, where I had a chance to slow down and enjoy all that there was to experience. The Gaspé Peninsula was every bit as beautiful as I imagined it to be. Driving along the beach to my left and the cliffs to my right while the sun crept higher into the sky felt surreal. Looking at the cliffs that made up the geology of these rocky areas, I could see the various layers that would have taken countless years to form, and how the St. Lawrence River carved through to create the Gaspé Peninsula. Churches and lighthouses abound the villages that dotted the Gaspé Peninsula, and naturally the churches would sit higher than any other building. Unfortunately, some of the buildings had signs of neglect and were in various stages of decay. While I wasn't able to visit any of the churches here, I was able to visit a few of the lighthouses. The entire scene reminded me of my life growing up in Atlantic Canada. Small, rustic, quaint villages that suffered from economic hardships while maintaining a common religious faith that brought the community together. While the villages along the Gaspé Peninsula were far from thriving, I can imagine how it would have been much busier when the world returned to normal. Several times I would stop and take a stroll around the beach, dip my hand into the cold Atlantic water, and feel the breeze from the ocean around my skin. The troubles that plagued me back in Victoria were far, far away. It was so easy for me to get distracted while driving, looking out into the ocean and stopping numerous times to enjoy the beauty of this region. Like many of the Atlantic provinces, there were a number of lighthouses which made up the lighthouse route, where one can enjoy stopping by the numerous historic lighthouses along the coast. Also, like the Atlantic provinces, every lighthouse on the Gaspé Peninsula was unique and had its own history as well. While I did want to visit some of the ones that were open to the public, my main goal was to explore Parc National Forillon. I continued driving until I reached the eastern entrance. After speaking with my broken Acadian to a lovely young lady at the gate, who was trying not to laugh at me, I drove down to Cap Bon Ami. As strange as it may seem, I was happy to see that I wasn't the only one who was enjoying the splendor of Parc National Forillon. Unlike Banff, which was crowded when I drove through there just days after starting my trip, there seemed to be some level of normalcy here, something that I haven't seen in a long time. From the vantage point just off the parking lot, I headed down to the beach. The weather was absolutely wonderful since leaving Quebec City and arriving here in the Gaspé Peninsula. It wasn't anywhere as humid, and while it was quite warm, there was still a constant breeze coming off the ocean. I didn't hop into the water, although some braved the cold Atlantic temperatures and decided to do so anyways. After making a quick video, I headed back up and began hiking. Throughout my trip, almost everything was spontaneous, so I didn't necessarily have any particular hiking trails planned. After some quick research, I located several hiking trails I knew I would visit. Using the Gaia app on my phone, I was able to determine which hiking trails would lead me to the best use of my time, as I wasn't planning on staying here overnight. Unfortunately, eating a lot of fast food and not exercising for a lengthy period of time meant that I could feel myself struggling to get up some of these trails. These would be very easy for me back when I was in Victoria, when I was in shape and hiking almost every weekend, but not so much anymore. And like what would be a regular occurrence to me, I did not bring any water. Along the way to the observation deck, I decided to make a very poor and stupid decision to hike without water on a hot summer day. Therefore, I would make a quick detour and then return to my beast. I made my way to the observation deck and enjoyed the stunning views in all the directions. I have seen so much beauty in Canada during my travels, and the Gaspé Peninsula is amongst the top 10. I do admit I was feeling a bit wary ascending to the top of the observation deck, as I normally don't use wood, as we don't normally use wood to build structures this high back in British Columbia. I had to put my faith in the hands of the Quebecois carpenters. They did an incredible job building a platform for visitors to immerse themselves in the beauty of the Gaspé Peninsula. Shortly after, I made a brisk return to my beast, where I gobbled down a whole lot of water. After resetting my GPS, I decided I would also visit the most famous section of Parc National Forillon, which is called Le Bout de Le Mont. Technically, I could have hiked from the observation deck all the way down to the Le Bout de Le Mont, which is what I was originally set to do. However, given that my body wasn't as strong as it normally was, I hopped in my beast and decided to relocate to a much closer parking lot. Along the way, I came across signs of a waterfall, so I had to pull over and check it out myself. Just a short and easy hike down into a gully led me to these beautiful waterfalls. They were nothing large or spectacular like Niagara Falls or Parc de la Chute Montmorency, but they were serene and peaceful. Aside from a couple who were leaving, I had no one to share this trail with. It was so peaceful to be out in nature, with the mist of the falls enveloping me and leaving me with a sense of tranquility. In a world of madness and chaos, I found peace in nature right here in Parc National Forillon. I felt torn as part of me, always being rushed, wanted to leave and make it to Le Bout de Le Mont, as that would still be a lengthy hike. The other part of me wanted to bask in this moment that left me with a sense of calm. After enjoying the scene around me for a moment, I took a deep breath, let the rush side of me win. I headed back to my beast and headed to the parking lot leading to the trail. The trail to Le Bout de Le Mont followed the southern tip of Parc National Forillon and was high up on the cliffs overlooking the water. Like my previous experiences here, there were very few people on the trail. The trail itself had more than one section. A lower section closer to the water and the cliff edge, and the upper section with more scenic views. I decided I would take the lower section towards Le Bout de Le Mont and use the upper section during my return. Being closer to the cliff edge allowed me better views directly to the water below. Certain sections were quite dangerous, as indicated by signage, although I'm sure some fearless Quebecois probably took a much closer look for themselves. Along the way, I passed through beautiful meadows where the colorful plant life surrounded me. Throughout this section of Parc National Forillon, the trail meandered along the cliff edge to deep within the forest. There was never any dull or boring area on this trail at all. Looking off into the distance, I was hoping to see whales along the mouth of the St. Lawrence River. Unfortunately, I didn't see any. I was also surprised that there wasn't any access to the beaches down at the bottom. I can imagine how dangerous it would be at high tide since the beaches seem to be quite short without any point of escape. I also found some graffiti on some of the beach benches and guardrails here. As no surprise, there were individuals who simply cannot discipline themselves from vandalizing public property. Aside from that, the entire park was in pristine condition. Easily the most beautiful and well-maintained national park I've visited so far. Eventually, I arrived at the lighthouse, which was just around the corner from the observation deck of the Butte de Le Mont. I saw a small black animal, either a skunk or a porcupine, devouring something in the grass. I didn't want to get too close and find out the hard way what that animal was, so I kept my distance. I had no knowledge of the animals that frequent this region aside from whales, but I knew it would be best to treat animals as if I was the visitor and this was their home. The lighthouse wasn't accessible to the public as it was fully automated. There were a number of plaques signifying different national parks across Canada, the whales that frequent the waters at the mouth of St. Lawrence, and the significance of Parc National Forillon. After taking a few pictures, I stood beside the guardrail just taking in the beauty of the Atlantic Ocean. That was part of my childhood. After decades, it was great to be back in Quebec. Great to be by the Atlantic Ocean once more. I headed down to the observation deck, sitting high above a cliff at the tip of the Parc National de Forillon. I could see why the Quebecois called this Land's End. Just looking off into the distance, it seemed like it was just endless ocean. I felt a sense of victory, a sense of achievement for being able to make it here, leaving all the issues that I've been dealing with for over a year back in Victoria to experience a region that I always wanted to visit, and finally reaching the Atlantic Ocean after decades. I felt an overwhelming joy in my heart. Unfortunately, my day would not end that way. I headed back to my beast using the upper section of the trail so I could enjoy the views as the sun began to set. I took my time. After all, why would I rush after feeling this sense of peace and tranquility, followed by a feeling of victory and achievement? Eventually, I arrived back to my beast, fired it up, and planned a route back to Saint-Anne-des-Monts. Looking at my fuel gauge, I had very little fuel left, so I researched what petrol stations were close by. And unfortunately, in this region, petrol stations were sparse and all the petrol stations were closed. I had to make a decision, a very quick decision. Knowing that I had CAA, I did not worry too much, although I knew that I would be cutting it close, whichever way I decided to go. Instead of backtracking, I took a different route altogether. I would cut across the Gaspé Peninsula and take a more direct route rather than backtracking the longer and scenic route along the St. Lawrence. Back in Saint-Anne-des-Monts, there was still one more petrol station that was closed late. I had to make it there. I began my drive, driving gently and keeping the RPMs as low as possible, and staying in sixth gear as much as I could to conserve fuel. The darkness had set in, and it was about a 3-hour drive to get back to Saint-Anne-des-Monts, and along the way I'd lost all internet access. It didn't occur to me that in certain regions I would not have internet access due to its rural location. Calling CAA was no longer an option, and I had to try to make it to Saint-Anne-des-Monts. I did pass a number of houses along the way, and I thought that in a worst-case scenario, I would stop and ask for help. After driving for several hours in a pitch-black highway, I arrived in Saint-Anne-des-Monts with the last remaining open petrol station, with my needle on the empty mark. I was probably running on nothing but fuel vapors and sediment for the last 10 harrowing minutes of my drive. The only positive note was I was able to discover that my absolute fuel range was 700 kilometers. That was not a method in which I would like to have discovered how far I could go before running out of fuel. I filled up with a sigh of relief, returned to the church where I would settle in for a night. What an adventure. Subscribe to the Travel Experience de Voyage channel Tap the bell and join the conversation on the comment section below.